Good evening. It's now 6 p.m. and the regular session of the Planning Commission of the City of Lancaster will come to order. Tonight our invocation will be offered by Vice Chair Hall, and the pledge will be led by Commissioner Terracciano. If you please stand.
Prayer tonight is for our troops off in faraway lands. We bless those who fight with courage, bravery, and strength to do what they must do today. May judgment, fairness, and compassion guide them. We bless those who must fight with safety to bring them out of harm's way as much as possible, sharpen their powers of perception to see dangers. We bless those who must fight with enough time to refresh their body and spirit for the next battle, time to relax a bit and laugh with their buddies. We bless those who must fight with peace of mind to accept the difficulty of their task with a willing spirit, knowing what they must do is appreciated and valued. Bless those who must fight with victory, and if injury happens, make it as minimal as it can be. Bring each warrior home and as soon as safely as possible. With our deepest gratitude and respect, we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Would you join me in saluting this great flag of ours? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Have a roll call, please.
Commissioners Diana Cook,
Present.
Cassandra Harvey,
Present.
Raj Mali, absent, Sandy Smith, Fabian Terracciano,
Here.
Vice Chair Randy Hall,
Here.
Chairman James Bowes.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Yeah, I did hear from Commissioner Molly that he was unable to attend this evening. Public business from the floor. If an individual is unable to stay the entire meeting due to extenuating circumstances, a total of 10 minutes is offered at this time, during which input may be given regarding agenda items. Individual speakers would be limited to 2 minutes each. Do we have any early speakers? Mr. Ludicky?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Then anyone wishing to address the Commission on any agendized item is requested to complete a speaker's card for the recording secretary and identify the agenda item you'd like to discuss. Each person will be given an opportunity to address the Planning Commission at the time the item is discussed by the Planning Commission. Speaker's cards are available at the rear of the chamber and here on your right, our left, next to Deputy City Attorney Mr. Adams. Individual speakers will be limited to 3 minutes each. Tonight we have a presentation from Kaiser Permanente on the proposed medical campus located at Avenue L and 5th Street West. Patricia Reyes Capelli?
Yes.
Good evening and welcome.
Thank you. We also have with us our Senior Land Use Manager, Nancy Burke, operating the video point right there.
Good evening, Ms. Burke, and we've met you folks before, and thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Okay, shall I begin? Okay, very good. This evening, what we're presenting is an overview of our master plan process, culminating with the actual end product that we're going to show you in a moment. The project, as you stated, is located on L Avenue and the intersection of 5th, the future 5th and 7th Streets. It's approximately 44 acres. And it's part of the Armagosa Creek specific plan. And as you can see in the PowerPoint, it's the lower right-hand corner of that particular site. Next. Basically, the full scope of what we'd like to do in the future is to construct, first of all, our Phase 1, 136,000 square foot specialty medical office building. And then in the future, at some point, a future hospital, central plant, and perhaps yet another medical office building, depending on how forecasts go. Next, please. So we wanted to start off first just explaining clearly what Kaiser's goal is with this particular project. And as you can see, to create built environments that support Kaiser Permanente's Thrive mission of healthier, happier places for our members, our staff, and the community. And we see the community not just as our members, as our campus, as the city of Lancaster, but all of the Antelope Valley, and quite frankly, the world. Next. When we initially moved forward with the master plan study with the assistance of HGA out of Santa Monica, we looked at a lot of criteria, and we initially came up with this plan that you see up here that lays out the buildings around a central pedestrian promenade surrounded by some gardens and some parking. Next. What we took into account is demonstrated by the photos you see. We looked at energy conservation. We looked at creating places for the community and our members to go outside and enjoy the outdoors. We included accessibility, local landmarks, history telling, and basically that supported that plan that you see now, which is, pretty straightforward plan. Next. Then what we did is we had a little bit of time to take a pause and really investigate the wind concerns of the area. Our local Kaiser staff made a big point of asking us to delve into that. So we did several studies with the HGA team and also with our Phase 1 team, and that's basically demonstrated by the wind wheel that you see in the upper right-hand corner. But what happened is we realized that we had to change our approach to master plan the site. Go ahead and click. Because basically we have quite a bit of wind coming in from the southwest corner, and we had to decide whether to fight the wind or to work with it and then minimize that wind. Next. We also took a step back and brought on some professionals to look at branding the site, because what we wanted to do at Lancaster that was unique is reflect the Lancaster and Antelope Valley character rather than just stamping a typical Kaiser campus where you come on campus and you know it's Kaiser, but you don't have anything to identify the campus and link it to the specific community it's in. So we started to identify some viewpoints and focuses as you approach the site from the freeway that we really wanted to emphasize, and you'll see that later on in the development. You'll see the ideas of actually marking that as a specific campus in Lancaster. And what you're seeing here in the PowerPoint is that we actually rotated the whole campus plan 45 degrees to allow the wind to move through the campus. And then later on you'll see how we used landscaping and berms to slow that wind down so you could actually read a newspaper in the Central Plaza. Next. And that basically is that pedestrian promenade is something that we'll touch on with the first phase, but we'll fully implement it with the development of the future buildings. Next. This also is showing how we zoned the campus. It's very important to keep different types of circulation separate. For example, you don't want to have your most used driveway to get to the first medical office building shared with ambulances, etc. So that's just one of the studies, and we've just truncated a demonstration of it. But basically the zoning of the site, as you can see it, our major entrance to the lower right-hand corner to get to the specialty MOB where we expect to have the highest volume. And this is conceptual, so it's not literally right there. You'll see that later on. But by turning it 45 degrees, we also found that it allowed us to give the future buildings more space and more flexibility. So we were very happy with that outcome. Next. This shows you an actual schematic level version of where that first phase is going to be. And you can see that we're improving the 5th Street up just past the first driveway. That'll be our major drive into the site. For right now, it'll give us access to the first medical office building. In the future, it'll give us access to the hospital front door, or so we think. Next. We also wanted to demonstrate that when the site is completely improved, we're actually going to be constructing 5th Street, 7th Street, and also a future, I think it's is it going to be K-12? Yeah, that northern street. And we'll be putting in 2 signalized intersections. With the first phase, we'll be putting in the one at 5th and L Avenue. And then, of course, we're going to have stop signs and stuff, and those include planted medians, etc. So we're bringing good things with us. Next. Now I wanted to focus on one of the goals that Kaiser has embedded, and that is improving the community, the environment, and how that all works together. And basically, we have a renewed mission just this year to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to enhance our position as an environmental leader in healthcare sector, manage our energy-related costs. That's an ongoing thing, of course, to safeguard our membership dollars, et cetera, and of course, to comply with all relevant laws, regulations, and commitments that we make. What we're talking about, next slide, what we're talking about is Kaiser's got a new drive to go after net zero. Net zero basically means that on an annual basis, you will produce as much energy as you consume. Next. So one of the things we did as part of the master plan with HCA is we came up with a whole list of the possible sustainable energy systems that we could do. But before we did that, and you won't see a slide on that, we reduced the load that the building is going to have as far as energy requirements by having a highly improved insulated envelope, meaning the roof, the exterior walls, the slabs. We implemented, or we will be implementing, LED lighting throughout, which reduces your heating load. We will be taking advantage of daylighting to reduce the amount of power required to even power the LED lights. We're using recycled water. We'll be extending the recycled water system that you already have here in the city of Lancaster. And then there's some other systems that we're looking at. And so initially, this is the picture that our consultants brought to us, all the possibilities, including geothermal, biogas, et cetera, et cetera. And so then we looked at how does that work with our goal for the site and all the different things that we're trying to do. For example, trying to create a friendly healing environment for staff and members, encouraging them to walk, to go outdoors, and to feel like the campus is a friendly, comfortable place to be. Next. So basically, we went back again to the wind studies, and what we're doing is looking at what does the climate of Lancaster have to offer that could be used as a solution for our energy needs. Next. And we looked at, this is the wind. We also looked at solar, of course. We all know Lancaster is the solar panel, capital of the world. Next. And so, we have this list, next, and what we found through doing specific targeted studies and even bringing on a turnkey vendors that deal with these systems, we've narrowed it down to 3 possibilities as far as where are we going to get our sustainable energy from. So basically photovoltaic, wind, and solar thermal. Next. And then, again, what we did is we went back to our mission statement and we said, okay, how does that work with our mission statement? And this slide demonstrates the kind of place that we're trying to create, not an ocean, a parking lot, trying to bring in trees and plants and everything, really making it a nice space to be. And we looked at that, we compared it with our options. Next. This is just showing, again, we are using the city's list of trees, but we're also trying to approach net zero with the plantings also. So we're taking those most drought-resistant samples out of the city's list. Next. And so basically, the big picture is that in order to provide net zero for our buildings, we found we had to do a combination of things. Go ahead and click. And what that showed us, click again, is that basically in order to actually hit net zero with this campus, we think we need to use wind turbines in combination with solar and thermal panels. Next, and this is kind of demonstrating, I'm sorry, go back, Nancy, I apologize. And what this is demonstrating is that the location, the actual prime location for those turbines, for example, would be in the far north eastern corner of the site, which happens to be in the path of the strongest winds. And it also happens to be far enough away from our future 5-story hospital and far enough away from any residential areas. And you can see how we have the mixed-use development basically surrounding the site. Next. So we went into detail about really finding out, will this work? And basically what we found is that with a single wind turbine, we could provide all the power we need on an annual basis for our first building. Next. So that basically demonstrates where that would be located. The street you see going from top to bottom on the right is L Avenue. And then you can see, this is an actual aerial photo, you can see how right now the land around there is undeveloped. And again, it's zoned commercial industrial, I believe. Next. And then in the future, what we'd want to do is add 2 more turbines to support the hospital. And that would carry the bulk of the load. And what that allows us to do is have trees, have plants, have Thrive Walks that go throughout the campus so people can enjoy the outdoors. And again, this is going to be open to the community. We even have an outdoor amphitheater. It's small, but it works in conjunction with our conferencing center that the community would be able to enjoy, because we want to bring people in and really, come to the site, not just when they're sick, but also when they're healthy, so it becomes part of the community. This slide, go back a moment, Nancy, I'm sorry. This slide basically just shows the boundaries of the Phase 1 development, and included in those boundaries, okay, go to the next slide, is quite an extensive landscaping effort. And that wedge of land that you see there is what you'll first see when you're driving down L Avenue, leaving the freeway. You'll see that whole vista of, we call it the meadow, but it's actually quite a few articulated, programmable outdoor spaces. You'll see all that open up, and then setting in it will be our building. Next. This is an aerial of the southeast, so if you're coming from Sierra Highway down L Avenue, this would be what you'd see. Next. And then just recently, we have some updated elevations. This facade with the curving wall that responds to the wind and is tilted out 10 degrees to respond to the solar path and stuff is actually facing L Avenue and will become kind of the billboard for our building. Next. This is the facade you see if you actually pull into the parking lot. You see that green wing that's part of our Thrive program that will be illuminated at night so people can understand immediately where the main entrance is, both during the day and night. And this is the view from the future pedestrian promenade. Next. So again, we just want to reiterate, how critical it is to our mission, and we think, to everyone, the idea of promoting the healthy community, supporting a healthy environment, ensuring good health extends beyond our doors, and we have a commitment to doing whatever we can on our sites to make that happen. Next. I think that's it. Are there any questions?
There probably will be some. And thank you for the presentation.
Okay. Thank you.
Seeing it the second time is even more informative, I think, than the first.
Yeah, I tweaked it a little bit. Yeah.
I believe you shared with us the clientele you serve in the Antelope Valley, approximately 100 and how many thousand?
I thought it was 165,000. Kelly, I don't know if you can correct me. 104? Maybe our projected target. We have a target that we use, that we build to, that's 5 years beyond the date the building is done. And I believe that targeted population is 165. Right where I got mixed up.
Impressive numbers, that's for sure. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Mr. Trossian?
Fabulous project. Very excited to see it get going. Phase 2 is going to be, what, a 100-bed hospital? 200,000 square feet is what I think you...
Phase 2 will depend on how the projections go if we continue to grow, and that's always a moving target. What we've done is left enough room on the campus, and we master planned to allow for up to 200 beds.
Correct.
But, none of us know really how the economy is going to go, but we are, committed to reserving that space on the campus for it. So if it happens, we're ready for it.
Right. But Phase 1, is it going to have any beds or no? Just
No, Phase 1 is specialty services, and basically it's things like urology, cardiology, chemotherapy, infusion, there'll be a large pharmacy, a lab, radiology, all those sorts of specialties that are a step above what we call primary care. We call this secondary care, which means these folks already know they're ill. And what we're doing is actually treating them and managing their health care services because they've already been identified as ill. And that's why it makes it so much more important for us to create an environment that makes them feel better.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Your 200-bed, is that a total, would that include cardiac, OB, pulmonary?
Well, quite frankly, right now, we're very happy with the contract we have with Antelope Valley for OBGYN, so we're not planning to do anything there. And cardiac is something we usually reserve for tertiary hospitals, very large hospitals. We will still be continuing our relationship with the Kaiser Panorama City Hospital for tertiary care services. So right now, we're targeting, I don't know what you would call it, for a standard 200-bed hospital. But typically, we don't do cardiac at every facility.
So would it mostly be med-surg or rehabs, or what's the mix?
Nothing's been drawn up. So right now it's a blank piece of paper. So once we get to that point, we'll look at the needs of our membership in the community and we'll go from there. So
Go right ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
How is this impacting, is this generally replacing the current location on 15th? Will that still be
No.
open
Yeah.
and
Actually-
phase it out, or?
Oh, not at all. Actually, part of this particular business case includes expanding our primary care services at the existing Lancaster offices. So we're going to fill that up. We've been actually wanting to expand that for quite some time. So this will give those other departments room and space to expand into. So that they will be in business for quite some time.
I was kind of excited. I'm a 35-year Kaiser member, and I remember going to the 15th location when it was one building and one little pharmacy. Everybody knew each other. But that is fantastic. It really is very, very exciting.
Happy to hear that.
I have another question. On the site, do you know if there's a projection, or this may be an unknown? Would you have like a helipad for transport out, or is that in the scope of planning where you would transport down to Panorama via helicopter or airlift?
Again, that's not something that we're forecasting, and again, typically you wouldn't do that except at a tertiary facility, and we're not seeing that in the cards. But again, it hasn't been programmed, so it's really unknown at this time.
Go right ahead.
I just have a question relative to the greenhouse gas reduction. You said that there will be a reduction. What is your target for the existing facility? I mean, have you gone in and maybe done a sampling to see what your metric ton usage is for that facility?
For the existing offices?
Right.
Well, I'm sure you've noticed the solar panels, so we're making an effort to reduce our reliance on the grid. What we are doing along with this remodel is we are going in without disturbing the current services being provided because we don't have any place to move that, and we're upgrading those mechanical and electrical systems, bringing them up to code, and then if we can implement any energy savings or devices in that upgrade, we are including that. So that's part of the next phase. Once we open the first phase up, then we'll go back in and do that.
Based on the age of that facility, it's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit out there where you can probably save some metric tons right away.
Yeah, because some of the units have package units on the roof, which is, for lay people, it's similar to what you'd have in a house.
Right.
As far as size. But but it's for commercial use. So there are some things that we can do, and I think one of the prime things is to bring in a BMS, a building management system, software where it ties it together, makes it more efficient. And also, we're insulating the buildings. You know, where we go in and we do work, we go in there and we insulate them. And they are a variety of construction types. That's totally true.
Great presentation. I look forward to seeing everything get up and running.
Yeah, okay, great. Me too.
Very good. Any other comments from anyone? Mr. Hall?
I like the way the Phase 1 building has the rippling sides and stuff. Was the change that you made in it, you said that there was a change. Was that on the southwest side where it looked like it was squared off?
Yeah, actually, what we found is that, looking at where the wind hits the building and how, we have to balance the environmental conditions with the needs of the departments inside. So basically, if we can't provide effective healthcare services, there's no point of it being, efficient and everything else. So it has to be a merging of the two goals. So we did square off those sides because it worked better for the departments within the building. But that curve, it's a little difficult to see, but the curve actually goes through that building and then reemerges where the reception lobby is, which is about 30 feet high, all glass facing the northwest. And then it comes out again as a projecting wing shielding the main entry from any winds that curl around the building. So we still have that whole wind thing integrated in there. And one thing I didn't point out was how the trees are layered very specifically so they act as a screen, gradually slowing down the wind that does still come through that area. So we'll be very picky when we put those trees in. Contractor probably won't like it, but that's what we need to do.
It is a very beautiful and exciting project, and as a lifetime resident of Antelope Valley, the winds are important to take into account, especially if the trees decide to lose their leaves in the wintertime. You're going to
I think we're using evergreen trees.
Oh, that would
Yeah,
be
and we're also using berming. So it's a big deal. We also plan to do another wind study once everything's settled. We're working with the city right now to finalize the design, and we'll be looking at it again and modeling it with the wind to make sure that we've covered all the contingencies.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So the technical aspects of your generator, what's the max dB you would anticipate at the property line with that system?
With the turbines, that is something that I did not memorize. I know we provided that information to the city, and I apologize, but I don't have it handy. I do know that it's, in layman's term, they said it's very similar to having a low wind blowing.
We occasionally have a low wind blowing here,
Yes.
The Commission does understand that the presentation you're giving us today is for information and to the community as well, and it is a very exciting project. This is in a specific plan area, and the director and all the other departments have an opportunity to fine-tune this project. We are currently reviewing our zoning regulations, which have impact on wind and solar and all different kinds of energy generating opportunities in the residential zone. There is a minimum standard in that zone, and I would hope that this project would meet that same minimum standard or maximum standard, whichever side of the equation you want to be on, as it may impact the users of this facility as well as the future neighbors. It's obvious that it is unimproved currently, adjacent to where this generator is proposed. This first generator is proposed to go, as well as the other two. I'm not a lifelong resident, but only 40, I don't know, 46 years, something like that. No, longer than that. Maybe a little longer than that. Long time. You get old, you forget time. At any rate, I do have some concerns about the the mass of the generator and its impact on the community. And we've stated that before when we met in a study session with you. So I just wanted to make sure it's on the record and folks hear it. There are trade-offs, and I recognize that. But I would hope that what is designed and what is technically analyzed meets the minimum standards as we have proposed in our zoning regulations that are before us on our next agenda item.
Understood.
Go ahead.
We, in that study session last time, brought up the possible noise of the wind generator, and one of the things that I asked was why couldn't we do like when we mitigate for plants or habitat and put it off-site? And you said the reason why was we couldn't have a long enough extension cord. Well, we went on a field trip last week and we found out that basically these sites are just little mini generators. They're not actually feeding the project. The grid is still feeding the project. So the main reason we're having windmills in town is because Edison won't allow you to go off-site and put the windmills out somewhere else, and then that allows you to become net zero. Is that proper understanding?
Well, I don't profess to be an expert with the wind turbines, or what I know that Edison does permit us to put it on the campus as long as the city is agreeable, et cetera, et cetera. But I also know that if we allowed Edison or trusted in Edison to construct it for us, we have no guarantee that it will ever happen. So that's a big concern of ours, because there are other avenues to being net zero, at least on paper. By actually installing a wind turbine on our campus, we know that it's achievable. We know that we will get it done and have it completed prior to opening the facility, and we have control of it. So I think that's probably one of the concerns that we have.
Well, I know our PV farmers, our photovoltaic farmers, are putting in these panels in great swaths of acreage out all over the place, and they're in control. And it would seem like it wouldn't be a lot different for Kaiser to do something similar, and like you said, it would net zero on paper. Also, as an eye-opener to me, I found out in our field trip last week that when the grid goes down, even though you have solar or wind, you lose your generating capacity. They flip a switch and you're no longer generating and you're in the dark. So I'm assuming Kaiser has battery or generating backup, diesel probably.
We do have an emergency generator included with the Phase 1 MOB. Yeah, so we were aware of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I understand this is an agenda item that's coming up before us. We have a maximum tower height in the rural residential zones for non-commercial wind energy systems. 65 feet would be the tower height, to a maximum in a larger parcel to 80 feet, with a overall diameter of a blade of 24 feet. My sense is this is a larger system. Am I right?
It is a larger system.
So would you put it in perspective for us?
Basically, you can compare it to the wind generator that's located at Palmdale Lake.
So, what's that size?
It is approximately 150 feet to the top of the tower, and it's 283 feet to the tip of the blade in its most upright position.
So if my math is right, the diameter of the blade would be
Do you want me to look it up?
You said 150 feet to the top of the tower
That's my understanding.
and 283 feet? No, 183 feet. Wouldn't be 283. 183 feet.
No, it is
So-
283. So let me look at this.
No, that would be Yeah, it would be a 133-foot radius. Would that be about right? Compared to a 24-foot radius, would that be about right? My math pretty close?
I know that,
Actually-
that Kaiser's proposed turbine, when you include the blade height, is 283 feet to the top.
Okay.
When you include the blade height of the facility at Palmdale's, at Lake Palmdale, I believe it is 315 to the top, if I'm
Plus it's on a little, no, plus it's on a little rise.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's on a small hill.
okay. Just curious. I would imagine that, at least I'm interested in what its mass would be in relationship to the 5-story building.
Right.
So that's,
The 5-story building would be approximately 16 feet each story, so that's, what, about 80 feet?
so this is like a 30-story building, right?
Yeah,
Be about right?
yeah. And so that does factor in with the overall, the efficiency of the unit itself, and its payback period is difficult to achieve unless you go to the larger turbine. You also have the issue of the smaller wind turbines, unfortunately, create a problem for birds. And they also generate a higher noise level. So, and in our particular case, because we're planning to put a 5-story hospital in front of it, the wind turbines also have to be high enough that the prevailing wind goes up and over the building
All right.
and can, maximize the ability of the wind turbine to
There are
use that.
trade-offs, I mean,
There are
I
trade-offs.
certainly
Yes, there
wouldn't
are.
argue with that.
Yeah,
And our general plan and the objectives of our city council certainly are to establish this community as a net zero energy community. So we clearly understand what those responsibilities are on this commission. So
thank you.
appreciate your candor in sharing the project with us. Anyone else have anything they'd like to add? All right. Thank
Okay.
you very
Thank you so much.
again for sharing the information with us and being with us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll take a couple of minutes while you folks gather up. All right, then. The next item on our agenda is our consent calendar, which is the approval of the minutes of the regular meeting of June 18th, 2012. Could I have a motion, please?
I'll move to approve the minutes of the regular meeting of June 18th, 2012.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, further discussion or comment? Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
Right. Thank you. All right, next item is a continued public hearing. It's identified as a new public hearing. However, it is a continued public hearing on the citywide residential zoning update. Tonight, we will hear a brief staff report on a recent field trip, just so everyone understands that last Monday afternoon, I should say, the commission convened and visited two residential developments in our community, one on the west side and one on the east side, where we had an opportunity to interact with it was Richmond American, I guess, on the west side, and KB on the east side with their representatives, and they shared with us their vision and what they're offering to the consumer on new constructed homes in those tracts. And we had a very informative field trip, those of us that could attend. And for those that weren't available, or unavailable, I should say, and couldn't be with us, I would hope you would share a little background with us and tell us what we saw. Thank you.
Good evening, Chairman Bose, Commissioners. I do have some slides prepared, so I'm going to retrieve the clicker. Yes. Yeah, okay. Joy is a more effective clicker than this device here. So back in May, we brought the residential zones before you as informational items. We had a nice PowerPoint presentation, and last month we opened the item up for public hearing, and there were some comments as to adequate outreach before the home builders, and so we made an effort to reach out to the home builders some more. On June 25th, we held a meeting with some home builder representatives. We have Marta Brown, AV Director of the BIA's LA Ventura chapter. We had Ron Mertzel from KB Homes, and we had Kevin Rogers from Pacific Communities, and they relayed to us their concerns with the residential zones. A summary of their concerns is, again, the requirement for solar. They would prefer to see it as an option instead of a requirement. Also, the requirement for additional elevations. There's a part of the residential zones that sets a minimum number of elevations required for each subdivision. They thought that the numbers in the draft were excessive. And then we talked about some opportunities that the draft provision would have as far as added density and opportunities for additional units in a subdivision, and they told us that they really provide no immediate benefit in this housing market, as they are building homes on subdivisions that have been recorded with partial infrastructure already built, fees partially paid. So they gave us an idea of how tough it is to build in this market. We took a field trip to a couple of locations, as you mentioned, the Meridian site in Richmond American, the Royal site in KB Homes. Some of the information that we gathered are that these builders are providing solar as a standard feature in their homes. The minimum system that they provide is a 1.44 kilowatt hour photovoltaic system. We had some question and answers with the home builders, and we asked them how many of these customers upgrade to a higher system. And we found that about 50 to 70% of the customers upgrade, and the reason for doing so is that the 1.44 kilowatt system really doesn't produce or generate. It generates a minimal amount of energy for customer use. It may take them out of the Tier 4 or the Tier 5 billing rates with Edison, but we see a lot of customers choosing to upgrade so that they can have a larger portion of their energy met by renewable energy. They've also told us that when they're built as part of a new house, the costs are lower compared to retrofitting. You have some of the labor costs built in as far as roofing labor and the labor it takes to get it wired for a PV system. Whereas if you were to retrofit an existing house, there's some additional work that you have to do just to get the house ready for a panel to sit on the roof. Of course, they make this possible with incentives, and there are a lot of incentives available currently, both for the builders and the customers, and they said that the incentives make it feasible for them to provide it as a standard feature. This is just an image of the Arroyo site. It's an aerial photo. You can see the photovoltaic panels on the roof, and you can kind of tell how many panels they have. They range the 1.44 standard option typically consists of 6 panels. Larger systems may include 12, maybe up to 18 for the largest systems that they offer as an option. So that wraps up the summary of the last couple of meetings that we have. Of course, the residential zones includes regulations on all sorts of matters that we are open to talk about. So that's at your discretion where you want to go and what you would like to discuss. And staff is available for any questions.
All right, thank you. Do we have any speaker cards on this matter, on this public hearing? We do not.
I don't see any.
All right, thank you.
You might want to poll the audience.
Ms. Brown? No. All right, thank you. Thank you for the update, and we've had extensive, what I consider extensive discussion to a point in the review. I think with last meeting we sort of stopped at the suggestion that photovoltaic systems be a standard, minimum standard of development in future residential projects. I think that's pretty much where we ended our discussion and suggested a field trip, and thank you for doing that. So, not that I want to limit discussion, but we can either pick it up there or go wherever you folks want to go with this thing. So we'll start with Ms. Cook.
I'm sorry I missed the field trip. I was out of town on business, but I'm kind of passionate about the solar aspect. What is the cost to the builder to include that on the home, number one? And then number two, on the mortgage of the 30-year mortgage, could they just increase that amount of the home over that 30 years? So if the house was going to be marketed and sold at $100,000 and it cost, I'm just going to use numbers that are probably not going to make sense, say $5,000, then you charge $105,000 for the home. Is that a possibility, and what is that actual cost? I know it would depend on square footage and amount of panels, but that would actually make a significant difference to utilize the solar that we already have going here in the city, so we can progress and keep going that direction.
Right. We did ask them that question, and they gave us a couple of figures. One figure was roughly $5,000 per kilowatt system. Now, each system, there's labor costs, and then there's the cost of the materials. The materials typically include, you have an inverter that converts direct current into alternating current, and the gentleman at Richmond American, he mentioned an inverter maybe in the range of about $1,500. And then there's the cost of the panels, and he also mentioned that a 6-panel system may be similar, but the moment you add more panels to the system, it certainly increases the cost of the system. We talked to Tom DePrima at KB at the Arroyo Tract, and he talked to us about the way they market this to customers. And one of the ways they market this is in terms of dollar amounts as far as their mortgage is concerned. Say, like you mentioned, if you add a $5,000 or $10,000 system to an existing house, in terms of a 30-year mortgage, it may be an addition of $20 a month. And $20 a month, as far as the added payment compared to the savings that they would achieve in terms of reduction of energy bill, it's enough for the customers to make a decision to go with solar, because sometimes it's added $20 for $80 savings. I think that was the example that Mr. DePrima had used. So
You said 80, not 8, right?
80. But of course it depends on the habits of the customer. Some of us are low users, and some of us have every computer and television turned on in the house.
You had mentioned during your report that the 6-panel system, that someone had mentioned that it knocks them out of Tier 4 or 5. And I didn't understand it that way. From what I understood, they were saying that the 6-panel had very little, and maybe I was wrong, maybe I heard it incorrectly, but adding like those extra 2 or 4 panels is what's going to knock you down out of the higher tiers. Did I misunderstand that?
Well, again, it depends on how much energy a household uses. When we talk about 1.44 kilowatt hours, what that essentially means is that for every hour of sunshine, that system is generating 1.44. It's not actually even up to 1. It's usually a percentage of that of electricity. So say 8 hours of sun out of a day, a 1 kilowatt system times 8 hours of sun, 8 kilowatts over the course of a day, times 25 sunny days out of the month. You do the math, and then you compare it to how much you use in a month. Most households, over in the winter, they may use up 600, 700, 800 kilowatts, out of a month. So it's, for a lot of households, it's you do an analysis of how much you use, and then you determine what type of system would fit your needs, and as far as matching up, or in terms of how much energy you want, what percentage of your energy use you want to be covered by renewable energy.
Yeah, if I can add a little bit to that, I think one of the points they made was that until you get, to 1.2 kilowatts on the system, it makes no sense to put it in. That you have to get to at least that level, because I guess that's the point at which you start to get some of the basic incentives to do it. And I understood that might be able to knock you out of a Tier 5 or a Tier 4 depending on your usage, but it's not going to do much else for you. But then, as I recall Mr. DePrima say, if you want to then go beyond that, you start to get a pretty significant set of incentives back that, I don't know, in his description almost seemed to say if it costs you $6,000 to put in the system to upgrade it further, you're going to get $5,000 to $5,500 of that back in some kind of direct tax incentive. So He said a lot of people upgrade because they're basically talking about a net $500 or so to double their capacity. And then I got the impression you do start to get some significant reductions in cost at that point.
However, by establishing a standard in the zoning regulation, nobody wants to think of us as regulators, but we really are. You then place a requirement on development, ultimately the consumer, good, bad, or indifferent, making a judgment of whatever regulation we choose to impose or not, has an impact long into the future. Frankly, I don't know that folks really understand, quote, the credits. The credits are not cash, not a check. They are a reduction in your tax burden, assuming you file an income tax return with the state and federal government. And depending on the incentives that are offered at any given time, those numbers change. So, the challenge is cutting through the sales pitch, and I don't want to belittle that because it is very informative, but it will be challenging for me personally to make a determination. The Royal Track happens to be oriented. The buildings face either north or south, and the streets run east or west. Well, that's optimum for this offering. But other configurations of subdivisions in our community, those tracks that we have approved in the past and we'll see in the future, aren't necessarily oriented that way. And then when you meld into it our conditions that are proposed in the zoning regulation relative to the roof lines and all those other impacts, when you start trying to demonstrate that in a visual way so you can really see what the impacts are, personally, that's what I'd like to see, because you get a east-west oriented or north-south oriented or north-southeast, north-south, southeast. I mean, it changes the opportunity for the PV systems to work at their 85% plus efficiency. Am I on track here?
Yeah, you're right. There's, as you mentioned, there's some trade-offs, and with better architecture, sometimes you're asking for additional roof pitches. When you ask for additional roof pitches, you kind of take away the buildable area you have for installing panels. And just to clarify additional comments we've received in the meeting we had with the builders, Marta had mentioned that she really would prefer it as an option instead of a requirement. In particular, she was aware of some discussion in our public works, between Public Works Director and with administration on some type of incentive program, and she said if we require it, it ought to be with some incentives. So I just wanted to disclose that, knowing that Marta's here, and she may be able to clarify that for me. But that was one of the comments that we had received.
But when we put on our regulator hat, then our interest may be based on a standard of aesthetics and marketability and livability as a minimum standard. So we have to fit some of those issues, at least in my mind, into this 80-page document that we have before us, 6 pages of which deals with the PV system, and we've got other opportunities to generate energy too. So something I'm not ready to make a decision on tonight, I can tell you that, on this one segment, because I'm really not clear. And I don't know where my fellow commissioners are, but I think I'm more confused than when I started here a couple of months ago on this one issue, after I've read through this thing 3 times, and it's challenging.
Yeah, from staff standpoint, I think, and of course we were going to be interested in hearing any of the discussion that the commission had on this issue, because granted we've only been in possession of a lot of this about a week from the field trip. From our standpoint, I think we're gonna take a look at that and propose some language to you. Obviously, I would agree we're not in a position to really look at an adoption this evening on it, but we would like to take the opportunity to propose some language based on what we heard during the field trip, also based on some of the internal discussions that we've had regarding this issue of whether there ought to be some alternative ways to approach it, and even the issue of when, if we do place a requirement of some kind, should we phase that in? Should it be some kind of a phased approach? One of the comments that we did hear, I think from, it must have been from Roger, I guess, was the issue that, hey, we aren't really geared up to do this at this point. Is there some time, that we would have to, if the city required this, to actually be prepared and phase it in? Obviously, the 2 builders that we met with out in the field have already done that. They already understand how to get this in. Their sales force apparently has been geared up to do this and given the proper terms, but others have not given it any thought or any approach.
On the field trip, I brought my neighbor name is Ed Nazen, and he had a suggestion. He said that probably shouldn't consider requiring just solar, just leave it kind of more open-ended. One of the things that was really important to me on that field trip is we don't have a requirement for solar at this moment, and yet we have 2 builders that are offering solar. So our requirement is just going to, when the market forces change, which means either the incentives are going to dry up or they're going to continue on, one or the other. The incentives dry up, then consumers will probably not want the solar unless it makes a huge difference on their electric bill. So it was important to me that right now the market's driving the people wanting the alternative energy source. And as they upgraded, they were also able to get $5,000 or $6,000 worth of upgrades for a net cost of $500 due to incentives, which we have no control over. I mean, the levels they're coming from, those are federal tax dollars, not county or state. So there is going to be some sort of change in those subsidies that we'd have to take into account. But I wanted to make sure that if we did lock in a regulation like solar, that it would be more open-ended, more like as the planning director Brian Ludicky was saying, windmill or some sort of. With my daughter in Europe, I've been looking at how they generate over there, and what they're doing is they have central plants for heating, so they're colder over there. So houses then have the water run to them. So we could do something like that in a housing tract instead of it being all separate house. Or like I was telling the Kaiser lady, maybe mitigating somewhere else. Also, too, we banter around the term net zero. I would love to hear a definition of what net zero is, so that way everybody's on the same page as what it is. I thought that when we were putting up electric panels and stuff that we were actually going to become self-sufficient, and net zero does not mean that now, does it?
Depends on how you define it.
No, I think as the Kaiser's architect indicated, I think the definition is basically, are you generating on an annual basis as much energy as that facility uses? But you're correct, it doesn't mean that at any given moment in time it's generating the amount that it's using, or even that it's directly running from that alternative energy system into the project. It's just a way of calculating it on an annual basis that if you use X, then your alternative energy sources are providing at least X. That's the definition.
The guy at KB, I think his name was Tom DePrima, he said that to become self-sufficient, you had to put in battery pack or a storage system of some sort. He even said the electric car that's coming along could also be used as that battery pack, which made me go look at the Chevy Volt today just to see if there was how that would work. And it does plug into 110. That was one of the things I suggested in here, is that we do make sure there's 220 available for the charging systems. But another interesting thing about the Volt 2 was it comes with a smart cord. And the salesman said that it was like plugging in 20 refrigerators. And he says what they do is somehow in the smart cord, there's a chip in the cord that says to Edison, and I don't know how Edison figures it out because I was talking to a car salesman, and he says that it will limit the cost of charging your car to $1.40 a day. And 11 hours later, you'll have a full battery in your Chevy Volt. I just thought I'd pass that on. I thought that was interesting. But I want the chip for my air conditioner now.
So, would you consider that a informational discussion or a sales pitch?
Well, it brought up the point about the net zero. A lot of people are probably under the misconception that net zero is I'm going to be self-sufficient. Solar panels on your roof mean none of that.
That's right.
And
it's fed into the grid, and if the grid goes down, so does your power, right?
Which was quite eye-opening to me. I would have thought at least we'd have lights on in the house or some way to keep our food stuff safe, but all of this energy talk, and we don't have anything in case we lose our connection to the grid. It's all down.
Candles and Duracell batteries, right?
It would be nice if there was some way we could make sure that the public is aware that the regulation is not going to make them self-sufficient.
Well,
And that's an important point. I mean, all of these things we're talking about are essentially what are known as behind-the-meter devices.
Right.
You're still connected to the grid, and whatever you generate behind the meter, so to speak, serves only to really offset whatever your usage is.
Well, I agree with Randy on the alternate, looking at alternate means of generating that energy. But I think one thing we have to look at, again, is the cost. Because if we're talking about, alternate ways to do that, I mean, we don't know I have no idea. I'm kind of familiar with solar, but as far as the other options, I'm not sure what the cost would be or how effective or what we would need to look at to be the minimum standard. And you talked about the north-south facing, the south is optimum and east-west isn't so much, and the pitched roof. Then you end up with, 3 panels over here and 2 over here trying to make it work. And I think aesthetically that's probably not what we're looking for, is to have, what we looked at was very clean, kind of flush with the roof. But if you're trying to make it work with all these different, elevations and relation to the sun, I think you can come up with a real big mess if you're just strictly sticking to solar and kind of regulating that.
And I think you've made an excellent point. It's a matter of imposing regulations and their actual impact in real time. What does it look like? I mean, it was very clean, the designs that you shared with us and that we saw. I mean, very clean, sharp. For some folks, you'd really have to pay attention to what was there, because it looks like it's very designed to be part of the roof system. But that would be on a standard hip roof, clean line, not very snazzy roof line, right? From the back, at least.
Right. I think we've, since the release of the public draft, which was back in July, back in January, we've gathered more information, and we will come back with a revision to the draft, a lot of which will deal with this solar topic, and we'll definitely, with the additional information that we have, try to provide some language that will try to address all the concerns that have been brought up here.
Thank you. Are we done with solar or alternate energy? We don't have to be. You look like you want to share something. Ms. Harvey?
There's a lot of good dialogue, and it's a lot of thought-provoking dialogue. So I think I'm where you just mentioned 20 minutes ago. I'm confused from the beginning again. So I think we need to revisit a lot of things.
All right. Well, we sort of got stuck on solar, and we've kicked it around some more. If you would like, we can move on to other areas that you may have concerns about. I've made some notes and have some to talk about, but if others do, please jump in. I know Mr. Hall had shared at least one communication with staff on some of the issues that you had raised, and I don't know if you care to talk about those some more.
Well, we can just read them into the minutes and make sure. My first one was on the cargo containers. We're going to allow them in the new zoning regulations with permits, and I wanted to just make sure that there was, if we were going to permit them, that they had to be some sort of language that said that they had to have some sort of maintenance to where they would not become a blight. Also on...
Would you take a suggestion?
Yes, please.
When I read our existing cargo container ordinance, and it's mirrored in these proposed regulation, I didn't see anything about the aesthetics of it as far as, possibly painting them a neutral color or something to match the aesthetics of the site where they're located, where in all the other regulations you have that standard. So it wouldn't seem to me to be unreasonable to impose that same standard on cargo containers.
It also could be that the cargo container could be a billboard, because most of them do have a name on it. So
yeah, my preference is that the billboard would go away.
Yes, that's kind of my suggestion too. Was there should be some maintenance on that.
So that's what you mean by maintenance, maybe?
Well, for my background's Architectural Design Commission. We help draft the design ordinances, and the neutral colors are important. And even though a cargo container will not fit in with the architectural design, at least maybe it could fit in with the desert landscape somehow. The home occupation ones, 1708-200, I was concerned about the ammo sales, the gun sales. I'm not against it. I think that those types of businesses are good, and I was told that most of them are mail order where they're drop shipping and stuff, but I was concerned about maybe a large storage of gunpowder could be stored there. Just having a neighbor that's next door with 55-gallon drum of high explosive, powder would be kind of make me more than a little nervous, I guess. Another step I had was garage conversions. It said if we convert a garage that we need to have covered or an off-street parking, and I wanted to make sure that that covered parking didn't block the sidewalk, so when we walked we wouldn't be into the street with our pretty new sidewalks that we're going to have. So didn't mention how far off the street the covered parking would be. Would it butt right up to the sidewalk, the covered parking?
Right, as with any structure, currently we have a 20-foot front yard setback that prohibits the construction of a structure into that front yard setback. I think currently with a garage conversion, they are allowed to do a garage conversion if there are still, for a single-family home, 2 parking spaces on site, covered or uncovered, and it's being kept this way in the proposed draft.
You said that you had 20-foot setback, but that brought up the next point about guest houses. We were talking about guest houses could actually be put in the front yard on some of our bigger lots. Would they be subject to the 20-foot setback if somebody had, a small golf course in their front yard? And
I guess theoretically they could if they have a large enough area. And with the proposed draft, the 20-foot setback is with our existing code. You'll see that in the draft regulations, it's shortened up a little bit. But as long as the intent is to have something that is aesthetically pleasing, so they could probably be built somewhat close to the front property line, and as long as it also meets all of our other architectural standards, it would be permitted.
And these guest houses that could be built can be rented out by the homeowner as property. He can have more than one. Say he wants to rent out the main house and the guest house. The regulations say that that's okay also, or?
I don't think it says that. It says one of the buildings has to be owner-occupied. If I read it right.
Well, there's a distinction between the guest house and the second dwelling unit. The guest house has a maximum square footage of 500 feet, which is intended almost like a detached bedroom, and the intention is implicit in the name guest house. It's for guests. The second dwelling unit is, you can almost have pretty much another house on the property if you have the room to do it and if you meet your setbacks. And in terms of a second...
Not more than 50% of the...
Right. With a second dwelling unit, yes, the owner has to be on site.
So in a second dwelling unit, though, they can rent that out. And how is that fair to our developers that have like an R7000, one unit per thing? Couldn't they can't build 2? The developer couldn't build 2?
I think the builder is allowed to do whatever the zoning code allows them to do. If the property is large enough, there's nothing stopping a home builder from maximizing the potential of the lot.
Okay. I feel like I'm up to speed.
Sorry. You mentioned the concern regarding the potential of a structure at the front of a lot, if I understood you correctly.
Yes.
So you would prefer that the regulation prohibit that?
No, I don't want it to prohibit anything. I just think that the language needs to be cleared up to make sure that we have how it's supposed to happen in case somebody comes in later on and says, hey, my neighbor just did this, this, and this, and you okayed it. Well, we followed the regulations. I just want to make sure it's as clear as it can be.
You don't want to prohibit anything? Well, then we ought to get this down to one page then.
I don't want to prohibit anything that may benefit property owners and stuff. I'm with you on the regulations. We're regulating, and it's hard to be up here and balance all that out.
Yeah. Well, some of these things, I understand clearly. You can sketch them out, and you can get an understanding of it. However, some of them, I think, I need to see an actual footprint of what it really looks like, and how it would fit on a, not that, demographics change, user needs change, perceptions change. This whole motivation of multi-generational housing really is what you're talking about potentially here, and giving the consumer that opportunity, or the developer, ultimately the consumer the opportunity, right? That's really what we're talking about here, if I understand the motive of some of these changes.
Yeah, that would certainly be a major driver, and you know, I can tell you, I've had more than one occasion where I've told people what they can do for their aging parents that they're moving in and what they can't do, but they may have gone and done what they, quote, can't do anyway. But yeah, we've had a number of people with that situation who, relatives, people they'd like to move in, but they'd like to give them their own space. And like a lot of other things, it's kind of hard to know who will take advantage of everything that's provided to them. Second dwelling units, for example, despite the fact that they've been in our code for a while and the process is pretty simple, we don't have many. We just don't. We've had a few, but not many.
I noticed a call out on some of those talks about the utility hookups. For the guest house and the carriage unit and so forth, the utilities are from the main structure. But the second dwelling unit would be separate, natural gas and Edison, however, not sewer and water.
That's how it's drafted. We've heard some concerns about the expense of providing these meters, and we're just...
Well, in our community, you can't get a will serve letter, so it'd be really interesting to try to get another water meter in the LA County Water Works system.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe they're issuing them, but I haven't seen any lately. So, but, and that's the reason why it's not called out.
It's drafted to mitigate those concerns.
But the opportunity to add these units, that's, you know, it's been in our regulation for a while, and it's not really been taken advantage of. But
it has. I would say in the last 10 years, we maybe have had a half a dozen requests.
But your sewer sizing, lateral location, and drainage, and all sorts of interesting things happen on a lot when you're trying to add a structure.
Right.
You know, it's great in concept, but until you engineer the thing and figure it out, it may not be even feasible, let alone economically.
Right. So instead, what we see more often are just people doing them illegally and with code violations.
But you give the consumer an opportunity to correct that in these regulations.
Yes, we do. Mm-hmm. Right.
Which it really isn't new. Those opportunities have been there, right?
It's been there.
Mr. Traciano?
Oh, I was just going to say your last comments, that would kind of spill over to building and safety, is my belief as far as this, you know, the over-X recompaction, the construction of whatever secondary house was being placed on the property, wouldn't it? And then, just being a layman, if you were going to add a guest house, you would, you know, put a sub panel on the structure itself and pull utilities from the existing unit already on the property. To me, if you were going to add a secondary meter onto the new structure, okay, now you're getting into different type of zonings, such as, you know, duplexes, triplexes, etc.
But this regulation allows it on any residential lot of 7,000 square foot or larger, right? I read that right?
Yeah.
Yes, provided they meet the property development regulations.
Right, but I mean, the minimum lot size would be 7,000 square foot,
Correct.
which really isn't new.
Just sitting here, something just occurred to me. I wonder if they'd be subject to the solar provision or a second unit.
Right. But
Hadn't thought about
but
that
I
till
think
now.
what Mr. Traciano's point the economics of it, of installing a new power, undergrounding it from the point of connection into the new structure and all the rest of the requirements. I mean, the economics just don't work as an add-on unless you just don't care about the economics. But as an additional structure in the initial development of a subdivision may be very viable.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, what I sense, or what I hear you saying, is that you could have someone who plans for that to start with in the development of their dwelling units and says, much like the old bonus room approach, they'll say, well, I've already geared it so you could put another unit here.
Yeah, the bonus rooms become an illegally converted garage in a lot of cases, right? But again, it's not, I mean, it's a code enforcement issue as long as there's a complaint filed. But if there's no complaint filed, there's no aggressive action on the part of code enforcement to seek those out and cite them. Right?
That's basically true. We tend to find most of them as a result of complaints.
Right.
Sometimes landlord-tenant disputes.
So your concern, Fabian, is that the regulation allow secondary units to hook up to the utilities from the primary unit?
Well, I think that's how it's done now. I think it'd be way too expensive to pull another water line, another electric meter.
Okay. So define for me on page 17, if you would, under site design, what safe by design means.
Safe by design is our opportunities, our techniques where we minimize opportunities for criminal behavior. This may be added lighting. This may be minimizing spaces where people can hide. That's some of the techniques. But there's a whole philosophy of what's considered safe by design. But usually it has to do with building orientation and lighting and to maximize safe paths of travel.
Was it defined in our regulations somewhere so folks know what's expected?
It's not so much in our zoning ordinance, but it is in our design guidelines.
Okay.
Could we put see these regulations in there when you put something like that in?
Yeah, we can add additional language for further clarification.
On that same page further down where you talk about the architectural form and so forth, I touched on the roof form in the previous discussion regarding alternative energy. Under number 4, you talk about a gable or overhang or eave or whatever being a minimum of, or no less than 12 inches. Seems to, that standard has seemed to have morphed into building construction. You save 6 inches on the end of a truss 2 ways. On 25 trusses, all of a sudden you save $87 on the lumber cost of a new structure. I understand what the purpose of it is, but it tends to, in my opinion, cheapen the look of a structure, and particularly on a 2-story building, or for my money, I would say a minimum of an 18-inch overhang should be our standard from my point of view. It's a small thing, but when you're costing out a new home, and I understand how it works. I mean, 6 inches times 2 times the number of trusses adds up to a number. And if you save that number, that's potentially what a consumer saves, or a public company generates in profit. So, or a private company. So, I don't know what ADC decided on. I don't know if this is a result of that.
Yeah, some of this was carried over from design guidelines, but anytime when you have a quantitative number to describe something as qualitative as aesthetics, there's always a debate of what's more appropriate and what the trade-offs are, whether it's costs or what it really looks like and the benefits of having such a requirement.
Well, originally, the purpose of eaves and gables and overhangs was to protect from weather, sun and rain and those kinds of things. That's the purpose of it. Otherwise, you'd have none, and the water would run down the side of the building, if you will. It's. I just bring it up. I don't know what others think about, but that's what I thought about. And you guys talked about the development community shared their concerns about the number of models and the number of floor plans and all the rest of it. I'm not sure where I stand on that. I just thought it was interesting comments. At the bottom of the page on 18, you talk about asphalt. You're talking about large expanses of paving, really, whether it be asphalt or concrete or DG for that matter. I mean,
I think number 3 is in the context of, in particular, multifamily developments where you can have large parking lots for apartment complexes, and the idea is to break up that large parking area with additional landscape planters.
Right. On the top of page 19, on number 5, you cite RVs, recreational vehicles. Do you mean by that to include things like boats and watercraft and skidoos and all those nifty little things that end up being an eyesore in the public view?
That's the intention, not just RVs.
So maybe you might want to expand on that language if that's the intent. Again, these are my views, not. On the middle of page 18, you talk about building design. The flat wall planes and so forth are prohibited, but then you talk about at least 2 different roof lines. And again, I'll touch on the alternative energy opportunities with roof lines. So how does it all fit? Further down, you talk about each small unit, single-family home shall have a porch area with a minimum dimension listed in section 17.08.6060C. And I looked at it, and the only thing I could see was the schematic. Maybe I missed it.
I'll make sure that there's accurate references.
Hmm?
You're looking at page 20?
Yeah.
Yeah.
1708.60C.
Okay.
And the only thing I could see on that reference was the schematic that identified the 4-foot porch or whatever. I'm not sure I care for the word porch, but alternative architectural feature maybe.
Yeah, and from staff's point of view, that's something that as we get more comments and feedback that we may consider revision to the language.
Okay. And on the next page, in the purpose on the density bonus, it talks about incentives. And again, since we are considering these as regulations, I think we should be mindful, and I've expressed this before, and I don't know how clear I've been. I'm not sure I've been clear the way I want to say it, but establishing regulation and standard is important, knowing full well that economic conditions change, the political realities of government change. Our role, it seems to me, is to establish a good working standard that is reasonable and fair, and what city councils may choose to do in offering incentives, which our city council has done in the past and will continue to do, no doubt, is in their purview, not ours. Our requirements, or our objective is to establish the fair standard. What a city council may choose to do and waive a standard or establish it is entirely their business, not ours. So unless it comes before us as a conditional use permit, and then we have the opportunity to make those recommendations, right?
The density bonus was part of the PC staff report, and it said that the incentives are added would only benefit newly designed tracks, and the staff report says that that you would consider the concerns that the builders had and forward them on and prepare responses. So I was curious. So we're not, density bonus wouldn't have anything to do with the existing recorded lots? Or
What I want to do is distinguish the density bonus that the state requires. There's a very specific state density bonus ordinance that this draft mirrors, and the requirements are very, very specific. And there's a density bonus, and then there's the infill incentives. They're two separate items. But we have an existing density bonus ordinance in our existing code, and just very briefly as a summary, the idea is that if a builder provides affordable units, deed-restricted affordable units, that they can achieve a density beyond what the zone allows. We've had this in our zoning ordinance for quite a while because it's state required. We haven't had takers in the past, but this is something that's carried over because it's required by the state. The infill incentives is something that's new that we're implementing as a result of our general plan policy back when we adopted the general plan. But the idea is to provide incentives for building on vacant lots within the urban core. I mean, if you drive around, we all see vacant, empty lots that's been bypassed, and we want to be able to draft in some incentives so that somebody would come in and be willing to build on those otherwise bypassed lots.
So this 1708-.80 and beyond are referencing infill. So take a look at the processing part on 22 and 23, top of 23 under B. If the project requires entitlements or an environmental clearance to be considered by the Planning Commission. So that means if it's a EIR, or mitigated neg deck, or an egg deck, then we hear it. Otherwise, it's the director's purview. Would that be right?
I think what this is saying is that any density bonus request will be reviewed concurrently with the project, whatever the project may be. And if the project requires environmental review, then that would be under your purview as well.
But if, as most of the items that come before us, environmentally, they conform to the city's general plan, then we don't hear it. We do not make a judgment on conditions. Those are at a staff level, right?
That's correct. Essentially, a density bonus request would go through its normal process, for whatever that project is. But what this does is tries to establish clearly who's got responsibility depending on what the normal processing of that would be. I'm trying to remember the last, I think we've had 2 projects get density bonuses in all the time I've been here, and they were both senior-only projects.
I remember one, I think, didn't come before this body.
Right.
I mean, you're talking about years ago.
Years ago.
Okay. On page 31, in the parking requirement uses that we've touched on previously, in the single family, you talk about 2 parking spaces within an enclosed garage. And then you move down to condominiums, and it calls out 2 parking spaces with a, not enclosed, but with a garage for each unit, and so on. So is the intent to be enclosed?
For single-family
Condominium.
homes and condos, that each condo unit has a...
With a garage.
Yeah,
My
has
point
a-
is enclosed. You call out enclosed in single family, but not in
The intent was enclosed.
okay. And further down, you talk about the parking requirements on standards for schools. When I ran the number on 33 spaces per 100 students at the AVC, you're talking about 2,600 parking spaces. It doesn't exist. It's not realistic. Now, if you're talking about equivalent full-time students, maybe it would work. But, all the public schools exempt themselves from the zoning regulations, so the parking standards wouldn't apply. Am I correct? Typically?
Yeah.
You take an elementary school with 700 kids in it, that's how many spaces?
Most of
105 spaces, and you won't find an elementary school in the city with 105 parking spaces.
most of these rates are the ITE. Michelle, tell me what that stands for. They produce a manual that publishes parking generation rates.
No, I understand the purpose of it, but in reality, the public sector doesn't build to these standards because they exempt themselves. And if you burden the private sector with it, are we being equitable? Is the question. That's all I'm just raising the question. If you have 60 staff in an elementary school and you require them to have 105 parking spaces, it's kind of like the shopping center requirement where we have standards for shopping centers which are only full 2 times a year, 2 days out of 365, and the rest of the time it might be 40 or 50% used.
Yeah, I'm not sure what these rates compare to as far as our public institutions.
I just thought they were awfully high in relationship to the reality of the marketplace. I don't know. Maybe they're not. I don't know.
Yeah, I think they're technical, but that raises an interesting question, which you might have the answer to. Do public schools from the state level, do they have a required parking ratio, or is it up to the local
No.
district?
No.
It's
they
up to
don't.
the local district.
Yeah. All comes down to money, just like everybody else, right? And then on the next page, you talk about paying in lieu parking fees for future parking, public parking. Do we have a in lieu parking fee ordinance?
Not at this time.
So, if we adopt a regulation, then we ought to have an ordinance that goes with it, wouldn't we?
I think it probably gives us the ability to do that, but I don't think we have a separate ordinance at this point.
Okay. So in the off chance that we had a project come forward with the new regulations as adopted and they wanted to pay it in lieu, or, yeah, never mind. Okay. On page 37, at the top, number 7, calls out parking spaces will be clearly outlined with 4-inch wide lines painted. And then further down, you talk about how you measure on double line parking. How do you measure a 4-inch one? From the center line of the 4-inch? To get your 9 or 9.5 or 10-foot width or whatever your standard happens to be and all these things. Is that how you get there?
The idea is to have the center of the double stripe.
Okay, but what about the single stripe? Where do you measure that? Center of the single stripe?
I was supposed to the center of the 4-inch wide stripe. Measure to the next
To the what?
center of the 4-inch wide
Okay.
stripe.
You call it out in one area, not in the other. I just curious. And on the middle of page 38, we get into the A-curves. On number 6, planters and interior parking shall be completely bordered by a 6-inch concrete curb to prevent runoff and act as a wheel stop where necessary, and then you say vehicle overhangs into landscape areas are prohibited. So how can it be a wheel stop in a landscape area and then prohibited?
Good point. But we can,
And then you discourage never mind. It just seemed to be contradictory to me. And you define in a previous regulation, 6-inch high and 6-inch wide, what a curb is. I'm assuming that's what you mean here too. You know. And then on the next page under 11, you talk about 25% of all trees shall be from a 24-inch box. Having dealt with landscapers that plant 15-gallon trees in 24-inch boxes, maybe we ought to make the standard a certain caliper width on the trunk of the tree as opposed to a box. That way you end up getting the quality you want. Maybe. Maybe not. I mean,
yeah, that's another approach to it.
it may be. And this been in the signing regulation for a long time. In the middle of the page where it talks about addresses being lighted or illuminated during hours of darkness, I don't recall seeing that on new subdivisions, but maybe it does exist. Maybe that is a standard. I don't get out much after dark, maybe that.
The newer ones, I think they are lit. Now, whether they're readable is another question, but they are lit. I've been in neighborhoods where I've seen it, so.
It's been in our regulation a long time. But, I mean, is that a... I'd
To
give up
define
the
new?
I'd give up the lighted addresses and go for the 18-inch.
Give it to him.
Go ahead.
Well, define new. I was just talking to Commissioner Cook, and her home was built in 2005. It's not lighted. Mine was built in 2004, and it is lighted.
Good question. The homes that I've seen that were built generally in 2005, 2006 generally have that lighting, but we'll take another look at it and see.
And I didn't know if mine were because I'm in a private community, so we don't have street lights. We are our own lights. We have carriage lights, so we try to illuminate everything that we can in order to keep our streets lit. So that may be what the issue is.
I don't know that I should even bring this one up, but I will. On page 40, in the middle of the page, temporary signs. This has been on our regulation a long time, I think. In the middle of the number 1, the permit, the right to install temporary signs is for 90 days only, and thereafter requires a permit. Since everybody's so focused on the economic realities of the sale of residential real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Signs stay up a little longer than 90 days, including the dwellings that are owned by the housing authority of this city. Now, I don't know if they're getting permits in conformance with the current regulation, and I don't know that anybody is. Certainly nobody in the real estate industry is that I'm aware of.
They vary. As long as they're on the market, the signs are there.
Right. But this regulation requires a permit after 90 days.
Yes.
Would that be correct? Am I reading it right?
The way it's written, yes.
Okay. And then they can't be, and then further down in number 6, it can't stay up longer than a year with permit, right?
Yeah, this is a regulation that's been carried over, but whether it's been met, we don't see a lot of applications in our department for temporary signs.
Right.
But we're also not spending a lot of time going after people that haven't submitted a permit for it either.
But temporary signs do tend to deteriorate and clutter up the landscape.
They do.
So if our objective is an aesthetic one, then
Yeah, oftentimes it becomes a enforcement issue.
In the past, we were working on suggestions for sign ordinances. This part here in the residential, is that going to be just for residential, or is this going to be part of the overarching one that we
Yeah,
have?
this is specific to residential zones, so a lot of it may reference signage for multifamily structures, apartments, condos.
Wouldn't that best be served by a sign ordinance itself? And then we could just reference the sign ordinance here and the zoning instead of spelling out everything separately?
If you browse the zoning ordinances of other jurisdictions, you'll see that some jurisdictions organize it just like the way you mentioned. They have one chapter for signs applicable to residential, commercial, offices, whatever zoning. In our zoning ordinance, each of our zones, whether it's residential or commercial, has its own sign regulation, but oftentimes there are parts that are redundant throughout each of the sections. It's all a matter of how you organize the information.
It seems like it might be less work to have one overarching one that we work on the sign ordinance, because that's still on our plate for the future.
Yeah, if you choose to do that in the future, having to have one overarching sign ordinance, we can remove this from this section, or however you choose to do it, whatever is most effective
But
or clear.
if we don't deal with it now, then
Yeah.
we can't ignore it. I mean, it has
I mean, this is somewhat, I mean, you can see this as a placeholder, if you will. We can't remove it now, because if we remove it now, there's nothing in the code that talks about signage for residential zones. But if you want to address it later and organize it differently, there's certainly an opportunity to do that.
But to be more user-friendly, if you're developing residential real estate, all of your development standards are in one chapter as opposed to having to flip back and forth and chase it.
There are different philosophies on this as far as usability of a zoning ordinance. Do you look it up by zone, or do you look it up by the type of development that you want to, get information on?
It's challenging enough to try to figure it out and understand it without having, to me anyway, having to jump from chapter to chapter and back and forth. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, I mean, of all the governing documents, the zoning ordinance is one of the most technical documents that we have.
Even though we're not regulators. It was interesting, and I get challenged when I look at the sign regulations. When you look at, on page 42, talk about the subdivision sales signs. And this is an industry that doesn't conform to the sign regulations either. Not that I'm only picking on my own profession, the real estate industry, the subdivision sales signs. But our regulation under 1C allows a height of a permitted sign measured from the bottom of the sign, 12 foot from the bottom, right? So it can be any height vertically above that can be engineered, I suppose, to where it doesn't become a hazard. There's no limitation to the height of the overall sign, right?
I believe it's a 12-foot maximum for the height permitted.
No, it says height permitted, 12 feet measured vertically from ground level at the base of the sign. So it can't be taller than 12 feet? Is that what that says?
It's intended to say no taller than 12 feet.
Okay. And these folks that are, I would suggest that the communities we visited last Monday have a myriad of signs beyond this limitation.
I note the observation.
So if we're going to develop a sign regulation, we probably ought to stick to it, huh? All of us, in any industry. Talking about your fencing, you don't call out the type. It just fence. So any structure that could be construed as a fence is a fence, whether it be man-made or natural vegetation.
There is a section for on prohibited fence materials, but
Right,
that's prohibited.
Yeah, razor wire and barbed wire, right?
Yeah.
Other than that, it could be any other material. Would that be right? The way it's written. Okay. On page 47, the projections permitted into yards, and I think this gets to what you were talking about relative to the structures in the front yards. would you apply this regulation to that? To limit or prohibit structures in front of a dwelling beyond the, in other words, if it was set back far enough from the street, it's feasible
Yes.
to build a whatever unit in front. Not that anybody would do it, but I mean, it is feasible. So would this section then prohibit that?
These are intended for eaves, fireplace structures that can encroach beyond the typical front yard or side yard setbacks.
Was it your intent to limit the structures in the front yard?
My intention was to clarify the language of it.
And usually, setbacks are usually designed for what we call usable or livable space. These are more building or architectural type features.
So are we concerned about, I mean, I personally am concerned about a alternate structure in front of a dwelling rather than on the side or the rear.
Right.
So, at least for my share of that, I'm concerned about that. So but I don't know that we have a regulation that controls that. Or do we care? And we talked about the cargo containers and the painting, right?
Yes.
And it's all current code under the cargo regs, right?
This mirrors what was adopted by council a few years ago.
Right. Okay. How about the animal keeping? I didn't look that up. Is that the same as we've had?
No, it's a little bit different.
How does it relate to the Los Angeles County Code? It was has recently been circulated and
I've not made that
discussed.
comparison.
Do you think it would be appropriate to
It's
look
definitely
at it
worth-
since
Sure.
a lot of our rural residential animal keepers are, involved with 4-H and future farmers and all that stuff? I mean, wouldn't they want to? Maybe we want to
Yeah, I can certainly take a look at that.
take a look. I don't know if it's good, bad, or indifferent. I haven't really looked at it. I just raised the question because it's only in 20,000 square foot. And you talk about gross lot area here, but in the beginning of the regulation, you talk about net lot area. And I don't know if it makes any difference, but in your definitions in the beginning of this chapter, you talk about gross lot areas. And you get into some of the regulations and which have been on the books for a while. You talk about a lot of net lot areas, and I don't know that gets complicated for people. And the designations, you've changed some of these designations that were previously, like the garage conversion that was under 160 before, and now it's under 210, and so you massaged all that stuff?
There is some reorganizations of some of the sections.
Okay. And the guest house section that Commissioner Hall talked about, I mean, there are distinctions. It'd be interesting to see what impact that has on housing stock into the future. But you limit it to size and you limit it to the number. So, for instance, if you have a garage conversion, you can't have a guest house and so forth. So if you have one opportunity, you can't have two. Would that be a simpler way to say it?
Yeah, there's some that, I guess, abuse their privileges, and
So in effect, you control it to one opportunity, whether it be a conversion or a guest house or a alternate secondary structure.
right.
Okay. All right. On top of page 60, under 13, prior to the issuance of building permit for the second dwelling unit, a covenant of restriction to run with the property. That's all wonderful, but shouldn't the form of that be in the regulations so people know precisely what is required, and the various departments then don't have to spend fees with the city attorney to review each and every one every time you get one? Wouldn't that be simpler to establish what the covenant ought to say as a standard form? I mean, not that I want to take away fees from the city attorney, but
Yeah, that type of form of covenant could certainly be drafted and included in the code.
does it make sense?
Yes, it does make sense.
On the solar farm, 61 at the top of page 62, but razor wire is prohibited. But yet, we just approved one.
Back when this was drafted, this particular section, maybe even a year ago, I consulted our environmental planner to ask what the typical conditions were. And so this mirrors what the typical conditions were at that time.
I don't have any problem with limiting razor wire entirely, but okay. So under the non-commercial wind energy systems on page 67, the tower heights and blade size and all that sort of stuff, I heard tonight, and I don't know how accurate it is, the potential of noise generation from these types of devices. I think it calls out here somewhere that it doesn't exceed, there it is under 9C on the next page, 65 decibels at any property line, right? Is that a reasonable standard? I mean, it's a noise standard of most any development or any.
Yeah, it's the typical residential noise standard.
Right. Can that be achieved with these?
Less than 65? Yes. I don't think that actually these have an issue so much with volume. I think where there have been complaints, it tends to be more of the, I don't even know the right word, rhythm of the noise. I'm not quite sure how to describe it. It's not so much the intensity of it. It's, I don't know. I guess
So
it's like
it's not a whisper quiet.
yeah, although they're getting,
Helicopter.
yeah, they're getting better, but it's more, I think, where we've had complaints, it's more the pattern, I guess. May not exceed the level, but has kind of a rhythmic pattern to it that apparently drives some people crazy.
It's not as aggravating as a subwoofer on somebody's lowrider.
I guess that depends on who you are. No.
Well, okay. I think I am So I know you call out in some of your regulation, you use these terms interchangeably, applicant, developer, builder. They're all applicants, right? But they may not necessarily be developers or builders.
They're applicants if they apply.
Right. So maybe it's appropriate to have one word, but maybe it's not. I don't know. I'm wordsmithing the thing. All right. That's all I have. Anyone else? So what's your intent as staff? What do you intend to do?
And same with all comments. We're going to take these, look at whether there are changes that ought to be incorporated into the code. Where we don't recommend any changes, we'll provide an explanation for our belief in that and provide it back to you in a matrix form, much the same way that we did with issues in the general plan and so forth.
So when would we anticipate then having, since this is a continued public hearing, I'm assuming then the recommendation is not then to adopt the regulations and the recommend to the City Council their approval, that it should be continued, but for how long? To get, so staff can prepare and provide us with.
Yes, I would go ahead and continue it to the next meeting so that the public hearing is open at that time. But as a practical matter, it's going to take us several weeks to provide response. And there are a couple of other things that have come up internally from staff that we may want to include within this. Our goal would be to get this out to you as a commission as part of the packet for your special meeting in August. That's sufficient time, hopefully, for you to look and at least provide additional comment at the next meeting or in some other form. But from my standpoint, I think we're probably looking at September before we're in a position to, perhaps ask for your action on this.
Okay. Is everyone comfortable with that?
We have 4 weeks before the next meeting, our agenda review. And how long would we have those revisions to look at before that?
They would come to you probably 3 days before the special meeting. And
a total of 10 days before the next public hearing.
Right. But once again, this is an issue. We want to make sure that we're thorough in our response. And from my standpoint, when I say September, that doesn't mean I'm expecting that you're going to act in September. It's just the earliest I think you're going to be in a position. We need to hammer all these things out and come up with a draft that you're comfortable with as a commission.
Okay. Thank you. So it would be appropriate then, without an objection, to continue this public hearing on the residential zone update to the next regular Planning Commission meeting. Okay, so any objection? Nope, so that's what we've done. So the next item, which we probably should have taken first so people didn't have to sit here and listen to us yammer on, and I apologize, I should have moved this next item up before it, which is the tentative parcel map number 72015. And so without objection, the public hearing is open on this. The applicant's the City of Lancaster, and the request is to a subdivision of 5 lots. And for the record, we've received modifications to the conditions of approval in a number of areas. So, could we have a brief report on this one?
Yes. This is a subdivision of 5 industrial lots in the SP 90-01 zone, otherwise known as the Lancaster Business Park. It is on roughly 21 gross acres, located east of the railroad tracks and on the north side of Avenue L. The lots range in size from approximately 1.76 acres to 10 acres. The project is consistent with the general plan land use designation of light industrial and the zoning of SP 90-01. Access from the subdivision will be obtained from the future extension of Avenue K15 via Business Center Parkway to the east and from Federal Drive via Business Center Parkway to the north. Any future development on the site, on the parcel, would require further review through a director's review application. The proposed subdivision meets zoning requirements and sufficient access utilities and infrastructure exist or can be extended to serve the site or serve the project. Therefore, staff recommends that the commission approve tentative parcel map 72015.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from anyone? The new condition on streets to restrict direct, number 4, to restrict direct vehicle access to Avenue L into Morton Way. Okay. So since this is a new subdivision of an existing project, the condition 5 and 6 were added because it's been a long time since the hydrology was studied, and somebody thought that maybe we ought to look at it some more.
No, these were standard, standard conditions that were modified to require them be submitted before recordation of the map instead of submittal of a map for plan check.
Okay. All right, great. All right. Do we have speakers? No. So the city accepts the new conditions, I'm sure, right? You're going to speak for the city, Brian?
I'll speak for the city. Yes, we accept them.
Andy? All right, then. So, any other comments, questions? Appropriate to close the public hearing without objection. Consider a motion on this item.
I move that we adopt resolution number 12-16, approving tentative parcel map number 72015.
Thank
I'll
you.
second that.
Thank you. Further discussion, comment? Please vote.
Motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Director's announcements.
None, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you. Anything for the commission's agenda? None. All right, public business from the floor. This portion of the agenda allows an individual the opportunity to address the commission on any subject regarding city business. Under state legislation, no action can be taken on non-agenda items. Members of the public should be aware of this when addressing the commission regarding items not specifically referenced on the agenda. Please complete a speaker's card for the recording secretary. Individual speakers are limited to 3 minutes each. Do we have any speakers that have an overwhelming desire to speak to us? Doesn't appear to be. So we stand adjourned until our special meeting for agenda review on Monday, August 13th, 2012 at 5:30 p.m. here in the Planning Conference Room at City Hall. Thank you all for your participation tonight.